An emergent capability of these large language models, including ChatGPT, is actually translation.
Dishonestly trying to get work and get money at the expense of real professional translators.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Slater Pod. Today, a quick news roundup show. Hi, Esther.
Hey, Florian.
So, new year, new habits, new structures, new everything. So we're going to, as some of you have noticed, we're going to split up the pod into the guest segment, and we're going to record a quick news roundup towards the end of the week. I think it's great. It's giving the guest some more time, kind of just a standalone segment, and we get to focus on the news as well. So I think this works. Hopefully we can keep up the publishing pace again weekly in 2023. What's on the agenda today? We're going to have to talk about ChatGPT, right?
I think so.
We have to. And then, we also are going to, again, talk about DeepL. They just confirmed that raise that we spoke about earlier, that unicorn round. It's kind of odd, that word unicorn, right? That unicorn round. We're going to talk about this translator CV scam, which has been going on ever since I joined the industry, like in 2004 or something. Briefly touch on the best and worst performing listed LSPs. I want to just bring up this Amazon study, which was super interesting about dubbing. And we're going to have to say goodbye to a beloved piece of research, which we'll talk about at the end. First, though, ChatGPT. It's the best performing podcast last year for us on YouTube.
It's not the one where you were pretending, or where you asked ChatGPT to be a translation manager.
Of course it is. How ridiculous is that?
Nice.
At least on YouTube, we didn't upload the audio version. The audio versions typically get some more downloads than the views on YouTube. But it's now like 2,000 views and it's climbing quite rapidly. I think it's getting picked up by Google search. If people like Google ChatGPT and translation, I think that thing pops up. Go check it out. It's kind of hard to explain. So what we did was, when it just came out, ChatGPT, we put in ChatGPT again. So for those that haven't heard about it, but I guess 99% of the people that are listening to this should have heard about ChatGPT. It's like an OpenAI large language model that can do all kinds of things, including, translation, but also, answer questions and code, do software code, etc. So we made it pretend to be a translation manager and ran like a kind of a fake 3-4 minute, not fake, just a pretend podcast with ChatGPT being the translation manager and us asking questions. And then
so you were interviewing ChatGPT with ChatGPT in the role of translation manager. Correct.
Accurately summarized. And then we took that content, we uploaded it to Synthesia and made 2 avatars, basically, speak the content. And then that was a 4-minute thing we uploaded on YouTube, and that's the most popular YouTube podcast we had last year, which is ridiculous. But anyway, so we're no longer needed, Esther. We can just kind of have the robots talk to each other. I was going to say,
should we hang up our podcast hats?
Well, if it generates views, why not? So yeah, okay, again, it's hard to kind of break down this whole ChatGPT from a non-expert point of view, but it's a huge, large language model, which we spoke about at length in the past. It has I don't know, 175 billion parameters, if I'm correct. It was launched by OpenAI, which is it's not very open. It's actually it's not an open source company. It's kind of a private company now. And they actually raised a lot of money from Microsoft early on, and they're going to raise a lot more from Microsoft now. And there's people talking about kind of ChatGPT replacing parts of Google search. So there's this massive hype going on at the moment. Why am I saying Google search? Well, you can, instead of Googling something, you can just kind of ask ChatGPT to give you the answer, right?
I think you can also link the two. You can have Google sort of display ChatGPT or something along those lines.
Probably not yet.
No, I saw something, I think, on LinkedIn about use cases and people who've already been building sort of startup ideas on top of ChatGPT. And one of them was exactly that you can kind of integrate ChatGPT responses into your browser, I think, rather than into Google.
There's thousands, or at least that's how it feels like, thousands of startups being started right now on top of this type of large language model, right? And ChatGPT in particular. I mean, the thing is, I'm kind of smartening up a little bit on these things. I think Google actually has something very similar, which is called Palm, Palm. And it's just, the talk on Twitter is that they haven't launched it yet, like as openly as OpenAI has, because like you're asking the model all kinds of weird questions, and it can answer. Like basically, there's initially people were asking like, "Hey, show me how to do a Molotov cocktail," and then like the AI would say, "Well, I'm not going to do that." But there's all kinds of other ways of kind of tricking the AI into doing something, malicious or weird or, biased or what have you. So I think Google is rightly quite cautious in releasing this into the wild.
Makes sense.
Anyway, so why are we talking about this? Because it also has a kind of an emergent capability of these large language models, including ChatGPT, is actually translation. So you can kind of post a piece of content, you can ask it to translate it. The quality is not really up to par yet with these specialized models, but it's quite good. It's probably more like NMT was like 5 years ago. So it's like slightly off sometimes. Maybe it's hallucinating a little bit sometimes, but it's actually not bad. But it's not like a threat to these specialized models that we all have come to love and to use in expert in the loop translation workflows. And that's actually also something that I think is interesting, that you're seeing a lot of especially on Twitter, you see a lot of software engineers like, oh my God, this thing is kind of helping me. It's writing like 80% of the code if I prompt it correctly. And like they're all, and also writers, etc. They're all sensing now, oh, we're getting into this kind of expert in the loop, needing to interact with AI workflow now. And then like the translation industry is like, yeah, well, been there, done that.
Yeah, learned the lesson, whatever, 4 or 5 years ago.
4, 5, 6 years ago, right? So it's a bit of a meh reaction from the translation industry for now, just like in terms of immediate impact. Of course, there's all kinds of discussions around, well, what if you can prompt the model to write proper multilingual content from scratch, so you don't even have to translate it anymore? And Intento gave a few good ideas at our last SlaterCon. So there's all kind of cool stuff coming online, but for now it's just watching and observing, and it's interesting. One company that's definitely still better in terms of machine translation than ChatGPT is DeepL, and what happened there?
Well, I think hotly anticipated fundraise has been confirmed. We did a story, I think, back in November saying that DeepL was in the process of raising money. That's now closed and confirmed. I mean, typically kind of tight-lipped, I suppose, from DeepL, although some of the tech reporting websites did come up with some numbers. So we have DeepL confirmed, according to TechCrunch, that they did the fundraise at a €1 billion valuation, so just over $1 billion. But then, you've got a lot of different figures kind of flying around in terms of how much they raised. But it seems some sources saying sort of $100 million, some saying 125. And that's sort of the headline news.
Good for them. And then there's also investor sources that said that it was valued at like 20x revenue, like run rate revenue. So that's like they're now at a run rate of about $50 million, which kind of makes sense, I think, ballpark from all the figures that we've heard over the past couple of years. So run rate meaning it's not like they actually did generate 50 million in 2022, but it's like in December they generated, a 12th of 50 million now.
Of that.
Yeah. And so, and apparently they doubled in size in 2022, breaking even or close to being profitable. Of course, they could be immediately very, very profitable if they didn't reinvest massively in hiring and ramping up, which we kind of unpacked in previous pods, right? We did this analysis. So, yeah, and I mean, now they have a lot of dry powder to go after these big enterprise clients, which is what I think they're trying to do. Maybe they're going to launch some new products. We spoke about the Writer product, I think, in a previous podcast.
They pulled it, didn't they?
They pulled it, or maybe they're going to launch it. So maybe they're going to do a few new products, but definitely they're going to go more into the enterprise. So look, overall, it's a massive vote of confidence in the language industry. You like the glass half empty version would be, they're basically going to disrupt it and going to take a lot of market share away from others. But I guess the glass half full version is, I mean, who's raising at 20 times revenue, run rate revenue in this environment right now? Almost no one, right? So, all right, DeepL ticks a couple of boxes, almost profitable or profitable and in AI. And then this is literally the only combination almost at the moment where you can raise at this crazy valuation. So overall, pretty big vote of confidence in the language technology industry. So I guess not bad, not bad.
Not bad at all.
So there's some people that don't want to make money the honest way, but they want to scam other people out of their hard-earned cash. So what's up with that, Esther?
Yeah, well, we're talking about translator scams. But I suppose there is some good news, despite people with nefarious intent trying to scam others, stealing CVs, possible work, and trying to basically taking over someone's CV and adding your own contact details to it, that sort of thing. So sort of, yeah, dishonestly trying to get work and get money and at the expense of real professional translators. But yeah, the good news is that according to the Translator Scammers Directory, or TSD, this is the first time in 2022 that there's actually been a decrease in the number of new scammer IDs. So that means names and email addresses that were created. So it seems to be on the decline, potentially, because TSD says the CV scam is becoming less and less profitable to scammers. And they pointed out that to their knowledge, there were no scammers got paid in 2022. So I think the idea here is that people are wising up. Like you said, this has kind of been the case. It's been ongoing for many, many years.
Forever, right?
Forever. So I think
I remember
people are just wise to it.
I remember this from way back in the days. I kept getting all these CVs. And I'm like, well, that doesn't look like, Hans Müller from Germany. That looks like... Anyway, yeah, so...
Somebody else, yeah.
Somebody else. It just didn't... I mean, like, don't... It just looked kind of scammy from the start because it's probably... You can't do it in a too sophisticated way because it costs you money. So you got to kind of go for spray and pray approach.
They were also kind of saying that, I mean, in terms of like LSPs or translation agencies vetting the CVs that come in, obviously there's a lot you can do. You can go on LinkedIn, you can kind of check, people's history and things like that in terms of due diligence and references and things like that. But actually, one of the suggestions that TSD had was that video calls are the best, just to make sure the person is who they say who they are. So that was one tip that we got out of that.
Yeah, you're not going to do a video call with these guys. All right. So good. Scamming on a downtrend. There's a few other things that have been on downtrends. Actually, out of all the listed language service providers that we're tracking, and it's almost a dozen, only 2 delivered a positive performance in 2022.
Oh, wow.
That is Zoo Digital, which we mentioned a number of times on this podcast. So if you invested $100 in Zoo Digital at the beginning of the year, you now have 137. And if you were bold enough to invest in Honyaku Services at the beginning of the 2020, you have $106.
Very good. I'd rather have the 139.
136, yeah.
136.
In 2022, in this environment, to actually generate any positive return is quite impressive because, a lot of companies, obviously the stock market's down overall. And, I think if you look at the benchmark, it's down 20%. That's the MSCI. That's like the broadest possible gauge of like stock market. Down 20%. Not good. But let's just go through some of the... So if you start at the top again, Zoo Digital performing well. Honyaku Center, obviously almost very, very illiquid stock, probably very thinly traded and, took a big hit like in 2019 and 2020 and 2021. So now they're barely just kind of hovering along there. The third would be Keyword Studios, down 4%. Then the Star 7, which listed this year, which is kind of a subsidiary of a Star, down 13. Then we got MetaReal, I think Japanese MT company, kind of fluctuating
Rosetta
around.
Used to be called
formerly Rosetta, right? 20%. Straker down 33%. RWS climbing out of a hole. So RWS was down 57% in like October, and it's now climbed up to be only down 39%. I think investors look like they're starting to appreciate the new CEO's vision, and so it's climbing back up. And then AI media down 53%. And then, yeah, it gets really dark at the bottom there with Appen being down 78%. And of course, from the peak, like it's down like 93 or 4%. It's like it traded at like 45 Aussie dollars. Now it's like down to like $2.50. So they got a new CEO. Let's see.
Yeah.
Let's see if he just posted something on the website like, hey, here's who I am, here's my strategy, and
nice.
They mentioned machine translation as well, so quite interesting. And then at the very bottom is a company called VIQ Solutions. It's a transcription company, so not doing as well as HappyScribe is, which we had on the pod a couple of days ago. That was interesting, and we're now testing HappyScribe for this podcast. So yeah, go to our. That's I think the chart is in our news briefing.
In the article.
Yeah, okay. It's part of it's like our new series, right? The news briefing, monthly briefing. That's available to subscribers. So head over there and click subscribe. Now, sorry, one thing I want to talk about just very briefly is the Amazon dubbing study. There's a team of a couple of Amazon researchers and someone from, I'm blanking on the name, but basically not work for Amazon, but maybe for the MIT, not sure. And then did like a project at Amazon. What they looked at is what they're calling a large-scale study of human localization with insights for automatic dubbing. That sounds interesting.
Human localization with insights for automatic dubbing. Okay.
Correct.
So not
because
specifically automatic dubbing, but they're looking at how humans localize to learn from that and put it into automatic or machine dubbing.
That is correct, because Amazon has a strong interest to eventually get automatic dubbing right, which is, probably one of the hardest thing ever in the language industry. But with all the content they're putting out, very, very kind of a very ambitious, but also very return on investment.
And they also have a large component of human translation, I suppose, or what you would call mostly human localization.
Correct. So what they did was they looked at 674 episodes of 54 shows that turn into 319 hours of content and 9,215 distinct speakers. So It must have been kind of pick and choose from individual episodes because, actually 600 episodes, 300 hours. So yeah, half an hour per episode. But yeah, nearly 10,000 distinct speakers. That's a lot of distinct speakers. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they looked at basically how human dubbers kind of balance the competing interests of semantic fidelity, natural speak, timing constraints, and convincing lip sync. And I mean, the convincing lip sync is just, it is important. Turns out it's not super important to the dubbers, but like to me, it's very important as a viewer, because I now very rarely watch dubbed content, but I used to as a kid basically only watch dubbed content. But now when I go back and like watch kind of linear TV and I come across one of these dubbed shows, it's so irritating.
Does it make you cringe?
It doesn't. It's not. It doesn't actually say that. Like you can see the English thing, the lip in kind of bird in the German content there. So anyway, so they looked at again how human dubbers balance the competing interests of semantic fidelity, natural speak, timing constraints, and convincing lip sync, and they found that human dubbers, which it's kind of interesting what they would call a human dubber, kind of that would be a voice artist combined with translation with maybe an agency, like an LSP, right? But let's just sum it up into...
it being sort of the final dubbed version.
Yeah, it being the human dubber. They say they display less respect for isochrony and especially lip sync, while being surprisingly unwilling to vary speaking rates or sacrifice translation quality to hit other constraints. So speaking rates, sacrifice translation quality, and so lip syncing is the one that's
kind of loses out, I suppose. So they're prioritizing the the natural speech or the speaking rate, as well as the what they call it semantic fidelity or translation quality above the actual lip sync.
Now, I don't know. I got to be very open here. I think there was one or a couple of comments on LinkedIn from like experts in the field that were like, yeah, really? Like, why would you be surprised? So I can't really, I don't really know how much of a surprise this would be to like specialists in the field. Maybe not so much, right? But given that this was probably one of the larger studies that went into this question, I mean, I still think it's interesting that they found that, right? So it's basically backed up by data, and the paper looks super serious. So we're trying to get them on the podcast. Let's see if they respond. Yeah, that's it. Now we have to say goodbye, Esther, to a very beloved piece of research. Why and who and what?
Who and what and why? I think we put out an article on this earlier this week to say that we're going to be retiring the job index, which most I know, sad. Most people will have seen one or many job indexes because it's been going for 4 years, and it's what we were using and tracking on a monthly basis, looking at sort of the strength of the hiring and employment within the language industry. So as to why we're retiring it, we were looking at lots of different sources underlying the job index, and several of those have very recently, in the past month or so, changed the level and type of information that's available to us. So we just can't get the underlying data that would make the job index a rich and meaningful index. It's a shame, but I think obviously we'd rather pull it than go ahead and sort of have something less meaningful than what we've been looking at and tracking for the past 4+ years.
So it's not because there's no more jobs available.
Oh, there's no jobs. Sorry. Yeah, all of the jobs have disappeared.
All of the jobs have gone away.
All of the jobs, yeah.
And
so that is sad. But
I mean,
obviously there's other ways that we kind of talk about and gauge the strength of hiring and employment in the industry. We'll continue to make that a topic of conversation as well.
Yeah, so it's not because the robots are taking over. It's because, there's just less available data out there. And so away it goes. And that's what we're going to do now as well. Say goodbye and see you next week again.